Welcome to Disrupting Peace, a show about why peace hasn't worked and how it still could. I'm Bridget Conley, Research Director at the World Peace Foundation. This season, we're looking at examples of resistance from 6 countries to see what we can learn. Scholars, activists, and politicians will help us understand how leaders attempt to concentrate power and how people fight back. Today, we're talking about the long-term impacts of electing a right-wing populist to office. We're going to hear how Silvio Berlusconi transformed Italian government and society, beginning when he was first elected prime minister in 1994. My guests today are Fabi Fugazza and Luisa Chiodi. Fabi Fugazza is co-executive director and legal expert at the Italian Coalition for Civil Liberties and Rights. She's a lawyer with extensive experience in human rights law. Luisa Chiodi holds a PhD in social and political science and has been the director of the think tank and online newspaper OBC Trans Europa since 2006. Together, we'll explore how Berlusconi legitimized the far right, even though he himself was a center-right politician, why people repeatedly vote for leaders that don't make their lives better, and how Italian activists have still achieved some progressive victories. Fabi, Luisa, welcome to Disrupting Peace.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting.
So today we're going to talk about the long-term impacts of electing a right-wing populist to lead a government, and we'll be looking at Italy, which elected media mogul Silvio Berlusconi as prime minister 3 times, from 1994 to 1995, and then 2001 to 2006, and finally 2008 to 2011. To help our audience understand why this history is relevant beyond Italy, we're going to start with a game that I'm calling Who Said This? Trump or Berlusconi?
Oh my God.
Amazing.
Fabi, you get to go first.
Oh, great.
Okay, this quote concerns Russian President Vladimir Putin. Was it Berlusconi or Trump who said, quote, "For my birthday, Putin sent me 20 bottles of vodka and a very sweet letter"?
That's a tough one because it could actually be either. It could be either. I'm going to go Berlusconi.
Yes, you win. Ding, ding.
A sweet letter, I don't know if it would be really Trump style.
Exactly. It would have been the best letter. Actually, what Trump said was about Putin, he liked me, I liked him. I mean, he's a tough cookie. Got a lot of the great charm and a lot of pride.
A tough cookie. I'm sure he loved that.
Exactly. So, Luisa, both Berlusconi and Trump have been prosecuted on corruption-related charges. Who said, quote, "The only crime that I have committed is to fearlessly defend our nation from those who seek to destroy it"?
Oh, I guess that was certainly not Berlusconi. His language was never fires. It was never as tough. It was always more much lighter, I guess. So, am I wrong?
Nope, you are absolutely correct. On Berlusconi, what he said was, this is the quote I have in English translation, "In exchange for the commitments I have made over almost 20 years in favor of my country, I have been rewarded with accusations and a verdict that is founded on absolutely nothing."
Yeah, playing the victim.
Yeah, exactly. Victim. There he is.
Of the communists, of course.
Yeah.
Which had disappeared from the face of earth except Italy in the 90s. We don't know why.
We'll get into that maybe. Fabi, you get the last one. Who said,
Oh, gosh.
This one I think you'll recognize. "We were the ones who brought the League and fascists into the government. We legitimized them. We constitutionalized them."
Oh, this is definitely Berlusconi.
Exactly.
You have to give it to him. He did speak a little bit more elegantly, I think. So you can sometimes hear it. But definitely as soon as you hear the word league, you're right there, yeah.
Yeah. So, what I was hoping to do with this quiz, not only start us off a little bit lighter, but also so that our audience can get a sense of some of the similarities that are starting to emerge. For people who don't know, who was Silvio Berlusconi?
He was one of the first modern politicians to rely on his personality and media to win votes. He was also the owner of a football team and the owner of a lot of Italy's media.
He was always presented as a successful businessman who entered politics. I would say it is the other way around. He is someone who entered politics for a personal endeavor. He wanted to save himself from many trials and accusations and of collusion with mafia, corruptions, etc. He was not a far-right leader. He was a populist, although he didn't like to be defined as such. He changed the language of politics from the past. He made it simple, approachable, understandable by everyone, taking from commercial TV and advertising a new style into politics, which before was instead very stiff, difficult, formal. And he never presented himself as a tough guy, as a bully, but rather as someone who would save Italy from the menace of the communists. But at the same time, convinced a large section of the population of his ability to relaunch the country, something that he was not able to do.
What was his appeal? Like, why did people vote for him?
I think people admired this super rich, big businessman who self-represented himself as a self-made man, as an innovator, someone who was changing the rule of the games. Somehow he was also representing the dream of many, I would say. Money, success, power, even power over women, which was one of his keywords, I would say. So a section of the country deeply disliked him, if not literally hated him. But the other part trusted him as someone that could bring the country out, and especially with the idea of cutting taxes, but also with this idea that he represented a dream life for many.
Louisa, my understanding of populism is really when you have a charismatic leader who wants to do away with institutions and claim a direct tie to the people, but often as a way of concentrating power.
Yes, I agree with that. It's the idea that you don't need any intermediation between the leader and its own voters. It is a way to question the viability of representative democracy, party politics, parliament, public debate, but also participatory democracy, meaning an ideology that considers civil society as useless, as a problem, as only representing elite rather than the real interest of the people. And it's also anti-expertise because the leader knows in this direct relation with its people what to do.
So for listeners who don't know, what is civil society?
NGOs, non-governmental organizations, but also sometimes churches, associations, all form of activism in society where people organize to advance specific issues. Is an organized form that mediates between the general population and the political power.
Right. Everything from the Boy Scouts to the League of Women Voters to civil rights and human rights organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
History obviously cannot be reduced to the impact of just one person.
Yeah.
But if you had to look back, how did Berlusconi change Italian politics?
Some of this would definitely sound familiar, I think, at this point to American audiences and probably the rest of us as well. But, one of the very first modern politicians to rely on personality and the media to win votes. And you can see that format has started to be replicated a little bit, a fair amount of charm. Of course, you need the performance to back it up, which was his downfall. His ownership of the media was a huge factor and definitely something relevant when we think about modern politics. Definitely the normalization of the far right. It brought along into Italy political actors who before that point were seen as quite extreme. And so you still see that now. Many, many years later, some of the normalization of the far right still shines through. That style of making grand promises that you couldn't keep, but again, offering hope to the Italian people, and in quite a similar way that Trump offers hope even if he cannot deliver on what eventual promises he's made. Yeah, so it's quite intoxicating, I think, for a population in distress to get all of these grand promises. And definitely you see a lot of his strategies and his, denigration of immigrants still living on today in Meloni's government.
I think one important thing, which is still today a very big problem, is that as a populist, he started the big delegitimation of the representative democracy, of the parliament as a place where discussions take place, where the rules are established in a confrontation between different worldviews. For instance, he assigned regularly seats in the regional assemblies, but also at the national parliament, to his mistresses. But openly, to showing it off, because the idea is to belittle the role of parliament and the idea of political representative as a relevant one. Then, of course, he completely discredited any form of check and balance, because he was the leader, the one who knows what to do, and therefore in the media he's conveying his message, although he simply controlled the media. And then he delegitimized the judiciary to such a systematic level, because he underwent almost 30 different trials. He accused the judiciary of being politically motivated and controlled by the communists.
Fabi, can you say a little bit more about how Berlusconi influenced the media in Italy?
He was a director of a company that owned Mediaset. Because of his influence and because of his ownership, he brought a lot of American programming to Italian eyeballs. But it also meant that any time that he wanted to communicate a message, or any time that he wanted to discredit somebody, he could use his media assets to ensure that would get broadcasted into a great many number of Italian homes. Yeah, if you own, I think, at least 3 channels, you're able to really attack your detractors at a really alarming pace and with a lot of consistency, and you're able to deliver your own messaging and normalize it. So he was really able to get through to voters at a depth and at a frequency that really, I think, is only rivaled today. It's also a legacy thing, that the connection between the government and the media, I think, really in earnest started with him, and the fact that he owned a media company and he owned channels.
Berlusconi had this political alliance before, and when he entered politics, he could control basically the public television plus the complete control of his own 3 private channels. So basically it was a dominance of the overwhelming majority of the information. But I think he also, as you said, controlled the way people looked at the world, not only through information, but also through shows and topics which were all in line with his worldview. So stressing the power of money, stressing the
Nudity, women,
of course,
a lot of sexy women,
diminishing women's role on a constant basis. So generally speaking, in introducing a pop culture which was really low level in many sense, and very heated political debates which we only created shows rather than real discussions.
Also, the largest publishing house, Mondadori, which is one that often gets forgotten. It's not just TV, it's also publishing. So Mondadori is still a very important publisher in Italy today. And then on the flip side of being able to deliver his messaging, also censoring those who were his detractors, because if you can also silence voices. So we do see that still today, that there is a level of censorship that occurs, and that being normal started with Berlusconi.
You both referred to his failures to deliver on promises, the failures of his policies. Can you just give me a brief insight into what those failures were? Was it his economic policies? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, the economy was certainly a large part of his downfall. A small part of it was timing. because he was in power in the times of GFC, where I'm pretty sure only Japan fared worse than Italy did.
Right, GFC, that's the global financial crisis.
Yes. And also, lack of investment in tech, I think. At that time, they used to be talking about generation 1,000 euros. And here we are many, many years later with about generation 1,200 euros.
Wait, can you explain that?
What that refers to is the salary per month of a typical Italian. And a lot of the reason why our youth don't want to stay is because they don't get paid very well, causing a bit of, a brain drain in Italy.
And Louisa, can you say a little bit more about how the way that he governed legitimized fascism? You said he wasn't far right, but the far right comes after him. So how did he allow that? How did he enable that?
Basically, he legitimized the parties of the far right to enter in a coalition with him, brought them in the government, and allowed them to become mainstream. It was related to the electoral law that we had that required such large coalitions. So somehow he could not win the government without that. He gave first the far right, the traditional far right, the centralist one, a seat in where they were normally not allowed to ever, not even to speak very often. I mean, they were really ostracized because of their fascist past.
Just to paint a picture, if we think about before Berlusconi, we have at least two that definitely would not be where they are today. So we have the Northern League, which we would call Lega Nord. They wanted to kind of break off apart. And they were initially just dismissed as a bit of an extremist movement. On the other side, you've got also the Italian social movement, basically the heir of Mussolini's fascist party. And, through Berlusconi's ability to bring them into government and make them mainstream, paved the way for the party of Giorgia Meloni, which is huge.
Can you say a little bit more about who the prime minister is today and what her party represents?
Under Giorgia Meloni, we have seen a softer face given to the far right in Italy. That's what I like to call it. I mean, they presented a really nice package for Italy in terms of, the first female head of state, looking very mild from the outside, but actually coming with a package of quite significant views. But also, she has a tremendous presence also now in the governing of Europe, which can't really be understated. She is popular. And while she does battle with some of the policies, as a politician, she's gained a number of friends. She tries to shake off the links to fascism, I think. But there's no question that a lot of her policies and a lot of the threads that come through her way of governing definitely reflect the fascist origins and the ties to Mussolini that party has in its history. I don't know if you agree, Louisa.
Yeah, I do think that her party is an extreme right-wing party.
Mm-hmm.
Many say that she's following Orban's playbook, which is starting mildly so that you can be recognized by the interlocutors at European level, where parties like her would not be in power. And neither in Austria nor in Germany, they are considered legitimate interlocutors for the moment.
And Louisa, that's Viktor Orban of Hungary, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Who started mildly and then became a stubborn extremist, really dismantling the democratic system in the country. In Hungary, and having a very problematic role at European level, constantly disrupting agreements and positions at European level, but most of all, not respecting agreements and norms at European level. So Meloni is basically, why is she there? Not really only because Berlusconi died and Forza Italia became a smaller party, but because she was the only one in opposition during the COVID crisis, which hit Italy very hardly. And she could attract all the discontent around the very strict measures that were adopted here precisely in response to the catastrophic consequences of the pandemic in the country. So she took advantage of it and collected all the discontent, which is very big in Italy. I mean, Italy is a country that is stagnating, where we had long years of budget cuts and, generally speaking, a decline of the functioning of the state apparatus because of the budget cuts, which originate in the devastating economic policies of the previous governments, including and starting with Berlusconi's government. The country is full of discontent. I don't think that Italy is a country full of right-wing extremists willing to have security measures at every moment, although the policies of the current government continuously stress security issues at every level and focusing on migration as a constant reason to fear, but also in general an approach to the European Union in very sovereignist logic. And of course, immediately the attitude is that of trying to control media. She immediately made policy with her government policies, which were pretty harsh on the national television in terms of control of the message that she could spread.
She got quite a lot of backlash for that too. So there was a significant number of very well-respected journalists who rejected that approach and departed, which is actually quite sad because it obviously just means that there are just more of those same supportive views in the media. Very traditional conservative views, very anti-migration, very opposed to government handouts and welfare, all the typical traditional energy, less regulation, all the traditional conservative types of policies.
Can you say more about the difference between center-right and far-right politics in Italy?
An extreme right wing has a very harsh policy in the field of migration, which is the case, for instance, today with Meloni, who tries, together with many other leaders at European level, to negate the right of asylum of many people arriving to the country. While, for instance, Berlusconi had the policies towards migration, which was, on the one hand, responding to societal difficulties in accepting the waves of migrants, but at the same time, regularizing them. So the biggest regularization of migrants in Italy was done by his own government. So another difference is on security issues. He was not obsessed by security issues. Today, instead, the main topic of the government is about guaranteeing security. The list can go from how to deal with drugs to gender issues, family issues. So I would say in the field of security, in the field of migration, in the field of personal rights, extreme right-wing is different from moderate right-wing. Then economic policies are a bit different. They were reducing taxation, but in a country where taxation anyway is pretty high. So, but certainly a moderate right wing follows the interest of the rich, let's say, which is, openly stated, but then even the poor vote for them and one doesn't know why.
I wanted to talk a little bit about resistance and pushing back. And the first question on this line is, what happened to the political left? How have they responded to these years of populist and now sort of more far-right leadership?
From Berlusconi onwards, the idea is that the progressives have become elitist. They don't know how people live. They represent a privileged section of society. So the workers no longer vote for them. They vote for the right wing. But somehow, because of the catastrophic economic situation in which Italy found itself when finally Berlusconi's government fell in 2011, the left was pushed for years in the position of being the responsible one, the one that had to take the burden of the budget cuts. So somehow, let's say, the left had no space for inspiring messages, messages that could warm the hearts and the minds of the voters. The left, as traditionally, it has been divided in very many subgroups and different lines, which is still the case. I mean, it's typical of the left in Europe, at least, different groups within the party which have factions that have different or slightly different worldviews and constantly fight among each other, which of course from the outside give a representation that can immediately be attacked as they don't know what they want, instead of showing an idea of pluralism, of possibility of debate, of valuing the treasure which is confronting different worldviews, because no one has the definite answer to anything. So the more we discuss, the better.
Yeah. Fabi, what about for you? Do you agree with that view of where the left went?
No, I agree. For sure, a major problem was the failure to be able to present a strong and inspiring alternative. Uninspired and technocratic are probably the best descriptive words for their perception amongst a lot of the population. The infighting, frequent changes in shifting alliances and leadership changes, things of that nature just makes the left look unstable. And so between looking unstable and being uninspiring and not presenting a solid alternative remains a big problem.
Both of you work in civil society. Are there any successes from your context that you think we could learn from in the US?
I have to say, looking in the long-term perspective, what I thought was that, yes, on the one hand, Berlusconi stayed in power for a long time, but at the same time, there were backlash to his narratives or policies, and also to the inability of the left to respond on the side of civil society. And I can make a couple of examples. One, for instance, is how, because of his male chauvinist patriarchal style, constantly attacking the dignity of women, basically Berlusconi helped to relaunch the Italian feminist movement, which is still strong today. And it has been rejuvenated by an important contribution of new generations. A few days ago, there was the 8th of March, and you could see how many different Italian towns had large protests by young Italian women struggling for the cultural transformation of the Italian society. Another example that I think gives a sense of, on the one hand, this